The one everyone mocked, thinking he was just a janitor, ended up putting the arrogant manager in his place. What happened next was something no one could have ever imagined. Friends, in the business world of New York, there was one name that people uttered with immense respect: Mehta Global Group. It had branches in several cities across the country, thousands of employees, and a turnover in the billions. But there was one thing very few people knew. Who was the real owner of the company? This was because the founder, Robert Williams, was now gradually handing over the responsibilities to his son, Mark Williams. Mark had been studying abroad for the past several years. After completing his studies in business, management, and leadership, he returned to America. But there was something different about him. He had no fondness for expensive clothes, no desire to show off big luxury cars, and no wish for people to bow down to him as the boss. He always said, a person's identity is defined by their behavior, not their clothes. The night he returned home, he was sitting at the dinner table with his family. Robert Williams smiled and said, "Son, your studies are complete. Now you have to take over the company, and we also want to start thinking about your marriage." Mark smiled faintly. His mother, Sarah Williams, said, "We are getting so many proposals from big, wealthy families. We just want to know your choice." Mark remained silent for a few seconds. Then he said, "Mom, I don't want a rich girl." Both of them looked at him. Mark continued, "I want a girl who recognizes a person by their character, not their money." Robert Williams smiled. "Finding a girl like that isn't easy." Mark replied, "Then I will find her."
अगले दिन मानव अपने कमरे में बैठा कुछ सोच रहा था। तभी उसके दिमाग में एक अजीब विचार आया। उसने तुरंत अपने पिता को बुलाया। पापा, अगर मैं मालिक बनकर किसी से मिलूंगा तो सब अच्छा व्यवहार करेंगे, असली चेहरा नहीं दिखेगा। विवेक बोले, तो? मानव बोला, मैं अपनी ही कंपनी में पहचान छुपाकर नौकरी करूंगा। 2 सेकंड तक कमरे में सन्नाटा रहा। संध्या मेहता हंस पड़ी। तुम मजाक कर रहे हो? लेकिन मानव बिल्कुल गंभीर था। मैं नीचे से देखना चाहता हूं कि कंपनी सच में कैसी चल रही है। विवेक मेहता बेटे को देखते रहे, फिर बोले, ठीक है, लेकिन किसी को पता नहीं चलेगा।
2 days later, a long line was formed outside the office of Williams Global Group. Today was the recruitment for janitors and support staff. Standing in that very line, in simple clothes, was a young man. With a light beard, a plain shirt, and a small bag on his shoulder. It was Mark Williams. No one knew that this boy was the actual owner of the entire company. Mark reached inside. Before the interview could start, a man quietly approached him. He asked, "Do you want the job?" Mark replied, "Yes." The man whispered, "Filling out the form does nothing. You have to pull some strings at the top." Mark understood. He asked, "How much?" The man replied, $1,500. Mark remained silent for a few seconds, a faint smile appearing on his face. He thought to himself, so it starts from here. He handed over the money, not to get the job, but to find out the truth. A little later, his name appeared on the selection list. Mark understood everything internally, but he said nothing. He decided in his mind, now the game begins. He had no idea that inside this very company, he was about to meet a girl who would change his life forever. The next morning, amidst the cold New York breeze, the massive office of Williams Global Group was packed with people as usual. Looking at the gleaming glass building from the outside, anyone would think that everything inside would be organized and magnificent. But Mark now knew that all that glitters is not gold. Today was his first day. Wearing a simple uniform, he went inside with the rest of the staff. No one even looked at him. Even those who did just saw him as a new janitor. The person sitting at the reception said without looking up, "You're new, right? Go to the 3rd floor and meet the manager, Richard Thompson." Mark headed toward the elevator. As soon as he reached the third floor, the atmosphere was completely different. Some people were working under intense stress, some sat in fear, and some were busy sweet-talking rather than doing actual work. Suddenly, a loud voice echoed. "Who made this report?" Everyone went dead silent. A man stepped out of the cabin. Wearing a black coat and an expensive watch, arrogance was written all over his face. It was Richard Thompson. He was screaming at an employee. "You take such a high salary and this is the work you do? Do you leave your brain at home?" The poor employee stood there with his head bowed. Mark stood at a distance, watching everything. Richard's eyes fell on him. "Who are you?" "The new janitor, sir." Richard looked him up and down, then laughed mockingly. "Well, you certainly look like one." A few people around them snickered. Mark remained calm. Richard said, "Do you even know how to work? Or did you just come here to get a job?" "I'll learn, sir." Richard replied, "We don't keep people who make mistakes here for long." Mark nodded, but internally he made a note. A team driven by fear doesn't stay strong for long. The day went on. Mark was delivering files, serving coffee, and observing everyone closely. Some people were working genuinely, while others were just putting on a show. Some were moving ahead without doing any real work. He started noting things down in a small diary. Suddenly, his eyes stopped near a cabin. A girl was sitting at her desk. Her face was serene, her clothes were simple, her desk was perfectly organized, and most importantly, she wasn't making any noise like the others. She was focused on her work. Just then, an elderly employee came over. He said softly, "Dear, I can't understand this file." The girl immediately stood up. "Sir, let me take a look." She explained it to him patiently. The elderly man smiled and left. Mark watched her for a few seconds. Just then, a girl sitting nearby said, "Emma, right? Why do you keep helping everyone?" She replied with a gentle smile, "Work in the office should be made easier, not harder." Mark heard her name for the first time, Emma Davis. A little later, an employee arrived in a hurry and dropped a file from his hands. Richard shouted from a distance, "You people don't know how to do anything!" But before he could say more, Emma stood up, picked up the file, and said, "Sir, it must have been an honest mistake in a hurry." Richard looked at her, calmed down a bit, and went inside his cabin. Mark was astonished to see this. Out of so many people, this was the first time someone had tried to save a colleague. In the afternoon, while Mark was setting down water, Emma noticed him. "Are you new?" Mark nodded. "Yes." Emma smiled. "The first day always feels tough. It'll get better slowly." Saying this, she handed him a glass of water. Mark remained silent for a few seconds. He just said, "Thank you." Emma said, "Everyone deserves respect here, no matter their position." She walked away. Mark stood there frozen. He felt for the first time that he hadn't just come here to inspect the company. Perhaps there was another reason altogether. But it was too early to decide, because it takes time to truly know a person, and Mark had resolved not to rush. That same evening, he returned home and told his mother, "Mom, I met a unique person at the company today." Sarah smiled. "A guy or a girl?" Mark smiled faintly. It's too early to say. But the smile on his face told a different story. He had no idea that a small incident in the coming days would change everything. Mark had been working at Meta Global Group for about 2 weeks now. In these days, he had witnessed a lot. People were getting promotions based on connections rather than performance. Some worked hard and stayed quiet, while others held on to their positions purely by creating fear. And what troubled him the most was how people completely changed their behavior based on a person's rank. But amidst all this, one thing remained unchanged: Emma Davis. She treated everyone the exact same way, whether it was a security guard, a janitor, or a senior executive. Mark had only managed to have a few brief conversations with her so far, but he had begun to realize that this girl was not like the rest. Meanwhile, back home, Sarah Williams would ask every day, "Did you find a nice girl?" Mark would always smile and change the subject. But Robert Williams understood that his son was figuring out much more than just marriage. In the meantime, Mark decided that the time had come to test people.
उसने सोचा, जो इंसान छोटी गलती पर अपना असली चेहरा दिखा दे, वही असली होता है। अगले दिन
The next morning, the office was buzzing. Richard Thompson was already in a bad mood, preparing for a meeting. He stepped out and called out, "Hey, new guy, go bring some coffee." Mark calmly went to the cafeteria, placed the coffee on a tray, and slowly walked toward the cabin. Many people in the office were busy with their tasks, and Emma was also sitting at her desk. Mark reached Richard and extended the cup. The very next second, the coffee spilled all over Richard's desk and clothes. The entire office fell dead silent. Everyone's eyes turned toward them. In reality, Mark had intentionally tilted the tray slightly. He wanted to see whether the person across from him would react as a human being or as a title holder when a mistake happened. Richard froze for a few seconds, then suddenly erupted. "How dare you!" He slammed his hand on the table. "If you don't know how to work, why do you even come looking for a job?" Mark remained silent. Richard grew angrier. Why do they even hire such people? Wherever you look, poor people just show up, doing no real work. A heavy silence hung over the office. Some people looked down. Nobody uttered a word. Richard stepped forward. "This is the problem with people like you. The moment you get an opportunity, you cause damage." Mark stood calmly. He simply said, "Sir, it was a mistake." But Richard didn't stop. "Your mistake will cost you a month's salary." Just then, a chair scraped back. Everyone saw that Emma had stood up. She walked forward slowly and said, "Sir?" Richard looked at her. Emma spoke in a calm voice. "It's not that big of a deal. It must have been an accident." Richard snapped. "Don't interrupt." Emma said, "But sir, humiliating someone like this in front of the entire office isn't right." The whole office was shocked. For the first time, someone had stood up to Richard. Richard said furiously, "Feeling too much pity, are we?" Emma remained quiet. Richard turned to Mark and barked, "Get out, right now!" Mark remained calm. "Sir?" "You're fired." ID badge down, looked at everyone, and walked out without saying another word. Emma watched him leave, unable to understand how someone who had just been fired. That evening, when Mark reached home, Sarah Williams got worried. "What happened?" Mark smiled. "I lost my job." Robert Williams was stunned. "What?" Mark sat down and said, "But today, I got a very crucial answer." Sarah asked, "What?" Mark spoke softly. "That girl, she respects others." Robert smiled, but the next moment Mark added, "A corporate layout won't stop me. Now I will go back. But this time, not as a janitor." Meanwhile, back at the office, Emma was staring out the window. For the first time, she felt bad for a complete stranger. She had no idea that in just a few days, that same boy would appear before her again, but in a completely new avatar. It had been 5 days since Mark was fired, but there was neither anger nor disappointment on his face, as if he knew all along that this would happen. Meanwhile, at the Williams mansion, Sarah Williams sat anxiously since morning. She said to Mark, "Son, you've seen everything now. Go back to your office and fix everything." Mark smiled. "Not yet, Mom." Robert Williams lowered his newspaper and asked, "What next then?" Mark thought for a few seconds and said, "This time, I won't go inside the company." Both looked at him. Mark explained, "I will observe from the outside. The real conversations happen among the people moving in and out of the office." Robert smiled faintly. He was beginning to realize that his son wasn't just analyzing the company, he was reading human nature. 2 days later, a new taxi driver appeared in the transportation service that shuttled the employees of Williams Global Group. Wearing a plain jacket, with a calm face and peaceful eyes, it was Mark. But this time, there was no one to recognize him. In the morning, when employees arrived, he would quietly drop them off, and in the evening, he would drive them back. Slowly, he started overhearing a lot of things. People talked about office politics, some discussed bribes, some praised Richard, and some feared him. Mark kept remembering everything. One afternoon, it started raining heavily. People were standing outside the office, and the corporate transport vehicles fell short. Just then, Emma came outside holding a file, heading out for some urgent work. A staff member said, "Ma'am, please take a taxi." As Emma went to sit inside, her eyes suddenly fell on the driver. She paused for a few seconds. Then she said, "You?" Mark smiled faintly. "Yes." Emma was astonished. "You're here?" Mark replied in a casual voice, "I needed work, and I found it here." Emma remained quiet for a while. Both were silent during the ride. After some time, Emma said, "I didn't feel good about that day." Mark asked, "About what?" "The way you were fired." Mark smiled. "Jobs come and go." Emma looked at him. But respect shouldn't be lost. For the first time, Mark looked at her and smiled genuinely. After a while, he asked, "You always help everyone." Emma chuckled. "No." "Then why?" Looking outside, Emma said, "My mother taught me at home, never change your behavior based on a person's condition." Hearing this, Mark fell silent for a few seconds. He thought to himself, she isn't putting on a show. She is truly like this. By then, they had reached the office. As Emma was about to step out, a voice came from behind. "Hey!" Both looked up to see Richard Thompson standing there. His eyes locked directly onto Mark. He walked forward. At first, he didn't recognize him, then suddenly blurted out, "You?" He laughed scornfully. "Back again?" Mark remained calm. Richard sneered. "Wherever I look, you just pop up." Then he turned to the travel staff. "Who hired him?" Total silence. Out of anger, Richard ordered, "Fire him from here right now." Just then, Emma stepped forward. "Sir, he is an employee here." Richard snapped, "Are you starting again?" Emma said, "He is doing his job properly." Richard laughed mockingly. "Why do you care so much about him?" A few seconds of silence followed. Emma said, "Because every human being deserves respect." The people standing outside the office began to watch. Richard said nothing, just glared at them, and walked inside. Emma left too, but before going, she turned back one last time to look at Mark. Mark smiled a little for the first time. That same night at home, Sarah Williams asked, "How is the girl?" Mark set down his water glass and said, "Even if I weren't the owner, this girl would have given me the same respect." Sarah smiled. Robert Williams remained silent, then asked, "So, what now?" Mark replied, "Now the final test remains." Meanwhile, the next day, a notice was posted in the office. A special annual company meeting would be held in 2 days, and attendance was mandatory for all employees. Richard smiled upon reading the notice. He thought to himself that his promotion was now guaranteed. But he had no idea that in 2 days, his chair was about to be shaken in front of the very person he had kicked out, calling him poor. There was a completely different atmosphere at Mehta Global Group today. Since morning, preparations were underway on every floor. It was a massive meeting. A stage had been set up and chairs were arranged beautifully. Employees came dressed in sharp clothes. Everyone was told that a major announcement regarding the company's future would be made today. But if anyone was exceptionally excited, it was Richard Thompson. For the past few days, he was completely confident that he was getting promoted today. He was talking to people as if he already owned the company. He told one employee, "Just watch, the people who reach the top are different." To another, he said, "Running a company isn't everyone's cup of tea." Some smiled, while others just nodded out of compulsion. Meanwhile, Emma sat at her desk. She had no particular interest in these things, but a different question was running through her mind. A taxi driver, his behavior, his calm demeanor, something was uniquely different. She couldn't understand why. By afternoon, everyone had
बड़ी स्क्रीन लगी थी। पहली बार कर्मचारियों में चर्चा थी। आज शायद कंपनी के नए फैसले होंगे। सुना है मालिक भी आने वाले हैं। कभी देखा है किसी ने? ज्यादातर लोगों ने सिर हिला दिया। असल मालिक को बहुत कम लोगों ने देखा था। रियान पहली लाइन में बैठ गया। आयना पीछे की तरफ बैठ गई। तभी मंच पर कंपनी के वरिष्ठ अधिकारी आए। उन्होंने माइक लिया। आप सभी का स्वागत है। तालियां बजी। फिर उन्होंने कहा, आज एक महत्वपूर्ण घोषणा होने वाली है। रियान मुस्कुराया, अपना कोट ठीक किया। उसे लग रहा था अगला नाम उसी का होगा, लेकिन अगले शब्द सुनकर उसका चेहरा बदल गया। घोषणा से पहले हम उस व्यक्ति को बुलाना चाहेंगे जो पिछले कुछ समय से कंपनी के अंदर रहकर यहाँ की वास्तविक स्थिति समझ रहा था। हॉल में हलचल, लोग इधर उधर देखने लगे। कौन? किसकी?
Just then, a person appeared on the path leading to the stage. Simple clothes, a calm face, deliberate steps. Some couldn't recognize him at first. Then suddenly, several people stood up. Someone whispered, "Oh my God, it's him." Emma looked closely. Her heart skipped a beat for a moment. She whispered, "Mark." Richard laughed at first, then looked closer, and the next instant, his face turned pale. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. "Please welcome the current chairman and owner of Williams Global Group, Mr. Mark Williams." The entire hall stood up. Thunderous applause erupted, but some people couldn't even bring themselves to clap. Richard froze in his chair, his eyes wide open and his hands trembling. He began to vividly recall his own words. Poor people. Fire him. He doesn't know how to work. And right in front of him stood the owner, Mark. Mark reached the stage, and Robert Williams and Sarah Williams joined him as well. Everyone now realized this wasn't a sudden decision. It was all pre-planned. Mark picked up the mic, and the whole hall went dead silent. He spoke, "I didn't come here as an owner. I came as an employee." Everyone listened intently. "I wanted to see if respect in this company is given based on rank or based on the human being." The hall remained silent. Then he added, "I secured my job by paying a bribe." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Richard looked down. "I witnessed humiliation. I saw fear. I saw wrong decisions." Then his gaze shifted to Richard. "And I also saw the true faces of certain people." Richard bowed his head in shame. Mark declared, "From today onward, no employee in this company will be mistreated. No bribes will be tolerated." Then records and reports were displayed on the screen. Bribes, wrongful hiring, intimidation, everything. Richard kept his eyes glued to the floor. A moment later, he was called to the front of the stage. He walked up, trembling, unable to utter a single word. Mark spoke in a calm voice. "Everyone makes mistakes, but a position doesn't mean authority. It means responsibility." Richard said nothing. The announcement of his termination from the position was made. The whole hall was silent. But just then, Mark's eyes found Emma sitting in the crowd. For the first time, he smiled and said, "But inside this company, I also found the very thing I came searching for." Emma was startled. Everyone's eyes turned toward her. But Mark said nothing further. He just smiled faintly and stepped down from the stage. Emma remained sitting there, beginning to realize that this story wasn't over yet.
2 days had passed since the meeting ended, but the office of Meta Global Group was still buzzing with the events of that day. People still couldn't believe that the boy everyone mistook for a janitor, who was fired and who was later seen driving a taxi, turned out to be the owner of the company. Some felt deeply embarrassed, some were astonished, and some stayed quiet, recalling their own behavior. But out of everyone, one person was in utter confusion: Emma Davis. She sat at her desk working, but her mind kept drifting back to that day. She remembered serving him water, his calm demeanor, his silence even after being fired, him driving a taxi, and then standing on stage as the owner. She couldn't comprehend how such a wealthy man could choose to live so simply. Meanwhile, Mark was sitting in his executive cabin. But today, he wasn't thinking like an owner. He was thinking like a son. Sarah Williams walked in, sat down, and asked, "So?" Mark smiled. "What?" Sarah smiled too. "The girl for whom you put on this entire act. What have you thought about her?" Mark remained silent for a while, then said, "Mom, I want to marry her." Sarah asked, "Are you sure?" Mark replied, "When I was a janitor, she gave me respect. When I was fired, she stood by me. When I was driving a taxi, her behavior didn't change. Even if I weren't the owner, she would probably still be the same." Robert Williams walked in and said, "Then what are we waiting for?" The next day, news spread through the office that the owner was going to meet an employee. Everyone wondered who had been called, but the summons went out in the name of Emma Davis. Emma was a bit nervous. It was her first time entering the owner's cabin. The door opened. Mark was sitting inside, but today there was no authoritative look on his face. He stood up and said, "Please, have a seat." Emma sat down. Both remained silent for a few seconds. Then Mark asked, "Can I ask you a question?" "Yes. If a person is simple, not very wealthy, but a good human being, would you marry him?" Emma was taken aback. She thought for a few seconds before answering, "I don't make this decision alone." Mark smiled slightly. "Meaning?" Emma spoke calmly. "If I am to get married, you will have to talk to my mother first." A brief silence filled the room, and then Mark began to smile so widely that his eyes sparkled. He said softly, "That is exactly the answer I wanted to hear." Emma couldn't quite understand. Just then, Mark said, "Emma, I want to marry you." Emma couldn't say anything for a few seconds. She just managed to say, "But..." Mark smiled. "We'll discuss the rest with your mother." A few days later, Mark and his family arrived at Emma's house, a small home, simplicity and respect. Emma's mother said with some hesitation, "We are not equals to you." Just then, Robert Williams smiled. Relationships are not built on equality. They are built on values. After a few meetings, the alliance was finalized. And then, the wedding everyone was waiting for took place. But it didn't happen in a 5-star hotel. There was no show-off, no media, and no thousands of guests. In a small church, with just the two families and a few close people, dressed in simple clothes and with peace on their faces, they got married. After the wedding, journalists asked, "Why such a simple wedding?" Mark smiled. "The girl who respected me when she thought I was a janitor doesn't need money to be impressed." A few months later, Mark implemented a new rule in the company: no bribes for jobs and no treating people based on their rank. That same day, he looked at Emma and said, "Managing a company was easy, but recognizing the right person was the hardest task." Emma smiled. It's good that you tried." Both laughed, and right there, from a simple beginning, a beautiful story unfolded. Moral of the story. This story teaches us that a person's true identity is not defined by their clothes, wealth, or position, but by their behavior, values, and respect for others. Those who do not lose their humanity under any circumstance always move ahead in life, and those who look down on others surely realize their mistake one day. If you liked this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the bell icon. Most importantly, leave a comment below to share what lesson you learned from this story. Do you believe a person should be judged by their wealth or their behavior? Your opinion matters a lot to us.